Welcome to our last recording for STEM 351, and we're going to go over Chapter 18 just a little bit. And rather than doing a PowerPoint, I thought that I would just have a brief discussion with you and talk about some of the things in the chapter that we've learned. Chapter 18 is just really where you review all the information that we have learned in the previous chapters. They have a lot of the guidelines in here that were at the end of each chapter, and what I've done is taken the PDFs and cut them and put them together in a document for you so that you can download it and have it to use to review. So the goal of this course has been to help us understand what is really going to make an e-learning module that we develop appropriate, effective, and engaging for our learners. And this book has helped us, and this course has helped us understand that we need to look at empirical research and see what people have found out have been successful and not so successful, and also all the processes or those guidelines that we have learned throughout the chapters. So there's a couple of general statements that we can make about the best use of media and its elements and different instructional methods that we use in making our lessons. And the thing that we always want to think about is, unless you know for sure ahead of time, you have to assume that the people who are taking your lesson are novices to this particular type of learning, and so you want to make sure that they don't suffer from mental overload. So in this scenario, you need to remember that we want to make sure that we have concise information that has narration of the relevant graphics. And then you will have situations where, you may not have audio available, so you have to remember that the best learning will result from concise, informal, written explanations of the graphics that you include, and placing the graphics and the text close together to make it easier for the learner. We've also talked about how it's important to divide the content into segments that allows the learner to have some kind of control over the rate at which they have to take in each segment and take in the learning. And also it's important to sequence supporting concepts prior to the process or procedure that's the focus of the lesson. We want to also remember that we are trying to promote generative learning. So that type of learning includes a lesson that will have worked examples that correspond and have self-explanation questions, ones that give the learner some engagement, but also some explanatory feedback so that they are aware of what it is they are learning. If you look in the chapter on pages 293 through 294, they talk some about the effect sizes. And if you'll remember earlier on, we talked about, earlier on we talked about the effect size and how it can give you some type of feedback, some type of data analysis to tell if a particular learning modality that you want to use will help your learner engage. Remember, we talked about effect sizes. So effect size that is greater than 0.5 indicates a practical improvement that's worth trying to apply to your learning module that you're creating. So if you look at this table, this is table 18.1 in your book, and it has different effects based on the type of learning principle that you apply. You will see that some of the most powerful methods, feedback is one of the most powerful methods because it has an effect size of 0.8. Just remember that when you look at these effect sizes, and they list all the different ones about modality, redundancy, personalization, worked examples, things like that. But just remember when you're looking at these that they represent an average value. So if it does say an effect size of 0.8, if you use feedback in your learning module, you cannot always absolutely guarantee that your particular learners will have that same effect size because it is an average drawn from many studies put together. And as I said, they have all of the learning guidelines from the back of the chapters in the next couple pages in the text. And so I've put those together as a document that you can print out and keep with you when you are working on your e-learning. The chapter also shows a couple of examples of e-learning lessons in small businesses, and you can read through those and see what's effective and what's not. But what is it that we want to have as a takeaway from being in this class and learning about these different principles? What is it about e-learning design that we need to remember? Well, some of the things that were kind of discussed but not totally covered in this book are questions like, do we need to have more productive research questions? You have to make sure that, as in anything, if you're asking a question, is the question you're asking really going to get the answer that you're looking for? Are you asking the question in the right way? So the book points out that evidence accumulated over a period of time shows that a good way to frame the question is like, which instructional techniques are more effective for specific learning populations and specific learning goals? And so that's something that you need to do. So if you were saying like, what feature of using a game is going to be more effective for my learners, or what feature of using a narrated PowerPoint with feedback and worked examples, is that going to be better for my learners? Another thing that they talk about, that's something going forward that you need to remember to think about, is most e-learning modules do have an assessment, and they assess the learner immediately after completing the module. But there are not many examples of where they assess the learner after, or the delayed assessment. Do you assess them a week after they finish the learning to see how much of that learning they retained? They also said that they need to have more research that's conducted in authentic environments. Obviously, to us, it makes sense that most of the things that they did research on were students who were working, in universities and different colleges. But let's do assessment in an authentic environment. If you're doing the automotive example, do it in an actual automotive shop where the learners learn this and then go out to the shop floor and carry that information forward. That's an authentic way to do it. You also need to think about the emphasis on the motivational aspect of e-learning. You can design any kind of lesson that you think is highly effective, but unless the learner has some internal motivation to do well, to learn, to want to be engaged in the learning, how can we assess that? So if you have low motivation by the learner, how are you going to overcome that? That is a common problem in asynchronous learning courses, because there's no interaction, no face-to-face, not a lot of visual interaction, even with videos or online collaborative sessions. So it's harder for a learner to motivate themselves because they feel somewhat in isolation. So it's just something that you need to think about. We also need to think about the metacognition involved by the learner. The learner is going to be in a learning environment through our module, and we need to make sure that they know how to actively manage their own cognitive processing to get the most benefit from it. This kind of goes back to giving the learner control versus having guided control by the person who designed it. And then we also have to talk about the efficiency of e-learning. E-learning is not going to go away. It is here to stay because most colleges, even if they are nonprofit, still have a bottom line and a budget, and so they have to operate with that budget in mind. E-learning is cost effective, but we want it to also be learner effective. So we have to be able to balance those two things and make sure that we can continue to provide effective and efficient e-learning for our learners. And then we also need to talk about the assessment in e-learning. Most e-learning modules only have assessment at the very end. So, that's not always the most accurate way to ensure that your learner is learning what you're presenting. If you've ever been a classroom teacher, you know that you have assessment at different intervals to ensure that they learned this segment before you go to the next segment. So that's something you need to think about when you're developing e-learning. And then the last thing that we need to consider is the new research that is out there. We need to continue to stay current on what's going on in e-learning. What is the research out there showing? You know, they talk about gaming. Everybody thinks that gaming is the most important thing for e-learners to learn quickly. Another thing that's out there is awarding of badges. People think, oh, if you complete this and you finish, we'll give you a badge. Does badging really increase a learner's satisfaction, engagement, and enrichment, enjoyment from taking this module? These are things that as an e-learning designer, it's a constant learning process. You constantly have to be out there checking and reading what the research says and then bringing it back and applying it to your own situation. So that concludes our book part of the class. As a reminder to everybody, your e-learning project is due. Remember, you can use any type of program you want. You can use PowerPoint and narrate it. You can use Screencast. You can use, Lord, I'm drawing a blank, Camtasia, Captivate, any of these different programs, anything that you feel comfortable using. But remember, what we've learned is people do better if it is a narrated type of e-learning module. So it should be anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. If it's 16 or 17, that's not a big deal, but you know, don't make it 25. So 10 to 15 is your ballpark for having it what you want it on. It is just one particular little module, so it's one thing, like teaching someone how to do a particular task at work. Or how to, like some of you used in your lessons at the beginning, how to change the oil in your car, how to use your camera, these kind of things. So just one small lesson. It's obviously not a comprehensive whole curriculum of something, but just one thing. So 10 to 15 minutes, narrated. Don't forget to put some type of guided practice or an assessment, whatever you want to call it, but it's a way to kind of check the learning that the learner should have taken in and then provide some type of feedback. That doesn't have to be something fancy on the screen. It can be, if you have PowerPoint, it could just be something that comes in after a certain amount of time after they click on something, or it can be verbal feedback. Verbal feedback is also very effective. So those are the things that you need to do, and just turn it in. And I'm working diligently on grading everything that's been turned in. It's the end of the semester, so everything gets a little crazy. But I hope you enjoyed class, and I hope you've learned something from this. And I know asynchronous was not everybody's choice for the way we wanted to do this class, but I hope you have learned that even though it does have its ups and downs, there's lots of different ways that you can approach an asynchronous learning environment. You can have collaborate sessions, you can have videos, you can have where the teacher makes videos, where the students make videos. So there's lots of ways to kind of put that personal touch and add that face to a somewhat faceless, anonymous environment. So I've enjoyed having all of you in class, and I hope that you have enjoyed it also. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me an email. And like I said, I will get them graded and back to you as soon as possible. And thank you and enjoy.